moving to Wednesdays.
I did it for you, Cynthia.
Here I am.
There you go. So everybody, welcome to Office Hours with me. I am Eileen Cook. It's Wednesday morning, January 9th. And I have two things to go over today. So one is just to let people know we will end just a tiny bit early today because I have someplace I have to be at 10:30 and I'm accounting for traffic. And the topic that I'm going to go over is actually a question that we had from Lily, who can't be here because of her work schedule. But she was struggling a little bit with point of view. So, and point of view is one of those things that drives basically everybody slightly batshit crazy from different times in their life. So I think it's actually probably a worthwhile thing to spend a little bit of time on. So let's just kind of first start, like, what is point of view? So it's sort of two different things in writing. So if you're doing nonfiction, point of view has to do with an argument that you might be making or an opinion. So the point of view that you are bringing to the piece. So this is an article about how to jumpstart your creativity. And my point of view is that you have to pull these things in or something like that. In a story, which is what we're usually talking about for most of us, we're talking about the narrator's position in terms of the description of events. And it literally means, it comes from Latin. People know I love a little nod to Latin. And I won't try and pronounce it correctly, but it's punctuum visuis, which literally means the point of sight. So where are you pointing your sight from? Which I think is a useful thing to sort of talk about with point of view, almost thinking in terms of camera angles. So where are you looking at the story from? So there's kind of 4 points of view that show up in fiction. And I think people know these, but just to kind of quickly summarize them, there's first person point of view, where I am telling the story. I woke up today and this various thing happened to me. There's second person point of view, which is you. You woke up this morning and this happened to you. You almost never see second person point of view in fiction. There is quite infamously a book out called You. I don't know if people have read it. It's the domestic thriller. Apparently it's now a show on Netflix, so I'm intrigued to see it on Netflix. I did read the book because I was curious how it would work. And it was an interesting experiment that for me was about 200 pages too long of an experiment. I found it interesting and intriguing, but I found it really challenging to read, to be constantly sort of addressed in the story in that way. For me, really threw me out of the story. So in general, I'm going to argue you probably don't want to use second person point of view, but I'm certainly not going to say that you can't, because someone of you will write it and it will be genius. And I won't think it's 200 pages of an experiment. Certainly the most common that I think we see is third person point of view limited. So it's he or she. And the narrator is outside the story. So we're sort of like looking in and sort of seeing what's happened. So Cynthia woke up that morning. And we often will talk about close point of view, where we're really trying to kind of dive into Cynthia's point of view, but we are doing it from the outside. So I am looking down godlike upon Cynthia and sort of saying, Cynthia saw this thing. In third person point of view, you might have rotating points of view. So we might have a chapter from Cynthia where we're sort of looking at Cynthia and then Bonnie and then so forth. So you can sort of move about within those different points of views. And then the last one that we talk about is omniscient, which is still sort of he or she, but it's where I, as the narrator, have almost godlike powers into absolutely everyone in the story. And again, I'm going to argue that omniscient is really hard to pull off successfully. So in general, I'm going to argue you're probably going to want to go first person point of view or third person point of view. So just to dive a little bit different, let's just go back to first person point of view. Again, it's where we're talking I. So call me Ishmael, if we want to go back to some of the classics. A lot of YA fiction is in first person point of view. So you'll see it very commonly in YA. I think you see it a little bit less in adult, but it does exist in that. What kind of makes it interesting and then at the same time challenging is that everything is funneled through that person's point of view. So you can't know anything the reader can't know anything that that character doesn't know. So that is what is kind of enjoyable and sort of challenging, that can do it. So I can't be everywhere at all times. So you're going to limit what I know to basically whatever I can experience or whatever someone is telling me. The fun, and I think certainly why we're seeing it come up often in thrillers, is first person point of view is biased, right? Because I'm the one telling the story. And you guys know that I am a huge fan of always thinking about what that person knows and what their perspective is. And this is where you get the idea, you sometimes hear the term unreliable narrator. So someone is telling you the story, but you don't necessarily know if they're being honest with you. So in my opinion, Gone Girl is one of the great examples of this, where you have, kind of rotating between the husband and the wife, but you don't necessarily know. And in fact, there's the wonderful scene where the husband is sort of talking, and it sort of comes out that, okay, his wife is missing and he loves her. He's desperately worried about her. And then, oh, yeah, I guess we have been having some problems in our marriage. And then he makes a reference that like, yeah, okay, I was having an affair. And then so as the reader, you're like all of a sudden thinking, well, wait a minute. We started with him saying he didn't do anything to his wife, but now I'm not 100% sure. So certainly the unreliable part of that can be really fun to play with. Things you have to be careful about is that the narrator sometimes may not be likable. And that can be a challenge because, again, we're 100% in that person's head. And people don't necessarily want to be in the head of someone that they dislike. Certainly this can be done. I think Gone Girl is a great example of neither of those characters is particularly very likable at all. But I certainly enjoyed the opportunity to pop into their heads. But if you are struggling, my argument might be that if you're going to do first person point of view, do your best to make your character likable, because it will be a little bit easier for the reader to inhabit that person's head for a period of time. One of my favorite thrillers is by my friend Kelly, and she did a book called Pretty Wicked. It's a series. And I guess you can argue it's a YA. It is a YA book, but it's a dark little bugger. And you are in the mind of a 15-year-old serial killer. And she is a sociopath. And so it is her kind of meting out justice and moving through her community. And it's a very uncomfortable place to be. And I think that was the challenge that she had with that book, is some people felt uncomfortable, scared to be in that kind of very dark place for a book. And I know that Kelly, just because I'm writing friends with her, we did a lot of back and forth about if she had rotating points of view from the friend's perspective, who was sane, so had that going for her, and was, kind of slowly beginning to suspect that the killer that's stalking their town might be her best friend. It's called Pretty Wicked. And Kelly is a local author, so if you ever want to chat with her, I can definitely connect you with Kelly. But that was one of the challenges that she definitely had with that book. So it is something to sort of consider. And then the other thing that you have to be careful about when you're in your character's head is that you don't spend too much time in your character's head, as much as that they're actually still doing things, and you don't have huge swaths where it is just them talking about what they're thinking and feeling, because you have the luxury of knowing exactly what they're thinking and feeling. And so it can be a little bit easy to sort of wallow around in there for a little bit. Again, second person point of view, I'm not really going to talk about a lot in terms of, I just think in general, it's probably not where you want to be writing your book from. But if you want to do it, you can certainly look at Bright Lights, Big City is an example of a book that did that. The book You is something that does that. There's a lot more, I think, short stories that do it quite well. And I think then it becomes a much more interesting kind of thing. It lets you, in dramatic terms, we call it breaking the fourth wall. So that is where I'm basically speaking directly to you as the narrator, right? So this is what's happening, right? Shakespeare does this in A Midsummer Night's Dream, where Puck actually addresses the audience. So he turns and he says, so this is going on, and what do you think? And are you a part of this? It can be just disconcerting for the reader, and I think that's why it's a little bit challenged. And then third person point of view, again, is where we're doing this sort of he and she. So I just pulled the first lines from Harry Potter. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky, the very last place you would expect an astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him, and he slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous. He wouldn't know that at this very moment. People were meeting in secret all over the country, were holding up their glasses and saying in hushed voices, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived." So everybody smiles. We all love Harry Potter. So that's an opportunity where you can see that the narrator is outside of that action and is showing us. And the kind of the luxury or nice thing about that is that you have the ability to sort of describe things in terms of ways that the character might not use. So again, when we're talking first person, if you are writing about a character who's a teen boy, he's probably not going to describe something as the cerulean blue sea, unless he's a very interesting teen boy, which he might be. But in many cases, he's not going to use that. But third would allow you to use that and then drop us into the character. And then you're going to go sort of deep into their thoughts. And so occasionally you're going to have the opportunity to sort of say what is in their head and what's going on. So I'm going through a thing. So you have an example that's here is this couple is having an argument and she wants cilantro. And he's frustrated because he doesn't want to do that. Like he's already home. Like he doesn't want to have to go back out and kind of tackle that. And so, do you want to eat? If you do, then you need to get the cilantro instead of acting like a lazy pig, Tina said. And then in italics, I can't believe I'm married to this jerk. At least back then he had a six-pack and not a hairy pot belly. So we're getting that glimpse into sort of what she is thinking. I'm going to argue then you would not want to have a line where you're necessarily going back into Fred's point of view and what he thinks of all of that. I still would probably stick with one person within that perspective. Although you might then have a chapter that's from Fred's point of view and we're getting his thoughts about this marriage and whether or not he thinks Tina is feeding him cilantro, which tastes like soap to many people. Although me, I love it. Omniscient point of view is one that I probably struggle with the most. So I'm going to do a free call out that this is not my area of strength between distinguishing third person omniscient and third person limited, other than it's kind of like porn. I know it when I see it. It's that sense of that you are truly almost that the narrator is God and they know the thoughts of everyone that's going on. And I don't particularly for myself is like it very much. I feel like it's distant because we're not really then in some ways I feel like committed to anyone telling the story. In terms of if we go back to thinking about camera angles, for me it's that idea that we are way above all of the action and looking down on it. So it feels distant to me. So I can see all the players in the field, which is I guess an advantage. But for me, like I never really feel like I'm a part of the story like I would if I was seeing it through Bonnie's eyes, or if I was seeing that we were focused on Leslie and what she was noticing, like in a limited point of view. So that for me is where I don't think it works very well. Having said that, I have not read, I don't know if anyone here has read the Game of Thrones books, but someone told me that that is omniscient and done particularly well. I haven't, like, I've seen the show, but that's right. So Leslie has a question here. So can you switch between third distance and third close? I think that you can. I think you want to make sure you're doing any of those kinds of switches in sections. So if you are having a scene that is from a little bit closer, and then if you want to pull back, then I think that works. But I think what you want to be careful about is switching too much in, which is when you hear the term head hopping, that's the idea that we're just bopping around from everyone, and it's just very disconcerting. Having said that, I'm not sure if anyone reads Nora Roberts. She's a romance writer. And when we say Nora Roberts is successful, that's a slight understatement. She sells like about a bazillion books a year. She's a big New York Times bestseller, and her books often have head hopping. So it becomes that thing where people will say, well, Nora Roberts does it, and so I want to do it. So I'm not going to say that you can't do it. I'm just saying that when you do it, it jars the reader. So again, think about it. Sometimes I think thinking about it like camera angles can be helpful, because you can imagine if the camera is showing me from this person's point of view and then suddenly jerks over, and now I'm looking from this person's point of view, and then jerks back over, and now we're seeing it from this other point of view. It just becomes like, wait, where am I? What am I looking at? And that's harder, versus if you're changing it from sort of scene to scene or chapter to chapter, you will see the opportunity to sort of, okay, now we are refocusing and we are doing this. The benefit, of course, is that you can then, as the author, show a lot more perspective. So you can sort of see things. So you don't have to worry about the fact that Bonnie doesn't know what Leslie is up to. But it's important that the reader know what Leslie is up to. So we're going to have a scene that's telling us what Leslie's up to, and then we're going to have possibly some fear and anticipation because Bonnie has no idea what is being plotted on Leslie's side of you, but the reader knows that thing, right? So sometimes if you're trying to build tension, that's a really nice way to do it. I think you can change POV in one chapter. But definitely I would do a hard space between the two so that it's clear for the reader that something is happening. And I use that hard or that extra space if there's a change in scene. So we are moving to a different place. So I want the reader to know that we have moved spaces, or we're changing point of view, or sometimes that time has passed. I think just that extra line of white space just gives them that sort of clarity. So what I'm going to do is pop up, Lily had sent me some pages and some questions. So I'm going to just pop that up so we can all take a look at it. So what happened is that Lily sent me this thing that she has 3 main characters, and they each have their own section. So there's Troy, there's, I'm going to probably pronounce this name wrong, Paria, who's the long distance love, Helena, who's his friend, and Gilda, his ex-girlfriend. So here we have all these people sort of interchanging. So she starts the section saying, Gilda. And I'm going to argue that in this section, she's actually in Troy's point of view when she starts, because Troy's going off to work. He's complaining about his condition. Karen is his daughter and calls him. So all these things are sort of happening. So basically his daughter is saying, I'm here with your ex-girlfriend. She's worried about you. We're thinking about coming over. And he's all like, no, please don't come over, especially with my ex-girlfriend. And basically they're like, yep, we're going to do that. So I just wanted to let Lily know in this section, we are still firmly in Troy's point of view because he's the one receiving the call. And there's even this thought like he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't need Gilda's sympathy or pity, but it's too late. So in that section, we are all still in Troy's point of view. Then we're in this house, and basically poor Troy, who's not feeling very well, has all these women fussing about around him, including his ex-girlfriend. And so, like, for example, he says, like, Troy looks at Gilda and he knows that she would throw away this stuff if she still lived here. Like, she wouldn't want that it was in this house, and all that's going on. And then at this point, it does switch to Gilda's point of view. Gilda sits calmly for a few moments. She knows Troy is longing to know what she's up to. So at that point, we do switch. So just for Lily to know, the section before that is still all Troy's point of view. And I think Lily's question is, how can Gilda know those things that are happening? So one is because you're switching points of view, she may not know certain things. So we may have a section, and that section might be from Troy's point of view. And then you're switching and we're taking into Gilda's point of view. But you can't open the chapter with the title Gilda and then have us in Troy's point of view. It'll just confuse the reader. Here's just, and sorry about this, this is what happens when you don't show up at office hours, Lily, because you have an actual job, is I start rewriting your pages. So I just plunked us more firmly into Gilda's point of view. So I did the clatter of dishes and overheard conversations at the Mexican restaurant made it hard to hear what Karen was saying to her dad, Troy, on the phone. Gilda didn't have to hear exactly what Troy was saying. She knew how he would feel about her coming. But, and then because I don't know her motivations, why does she still want to show up? Gilda smiled at Karen and then slipped away to the bathroom to give the girl some privacy. Either she'd talk Troy into letting her come over or not. The ladies' room was blissfully quiet compared to the dining room, but the heavy smell of cleanser mixed with the scent of fried food and spicy salsa went into a nauseating mix. She ran cool water over her hands, trying to cool her thoughts. Bad echo there, sorry. Hearing about the attack from Karen had made her, and then sort of how she, like, is she happy that Troy got attacked or not? She needed to see Troy. She knew if she was able to show how much she cared for him, they would start again. She'd bring him some pears, maybe some of those tiny red grapes he loved so much. That would make peace between them. So what I was trying to do is put all of those things in. So I think that you wanted to show that Troy wasn't happy about Cynthia. That's because I was looking at Cynthia when I was talking. Troy didn't want Cynthia coming over because she wasn't even in the story, for God's sakes. He didn't want Glinda coming over. So I think you have two ways of showing that. You either have a scene that is from Troy's point of view, where we're hearing him get the call and having his internal thoughts, but I don't think you need that. I think you could open, and I think you could argue that Glinda's probably going to have a fairly good idea about how Troy feels about it. So if she's in the restaurant and she's watching Karen call him and sort of talk him into all of them coming over, she's going to have thoughts or feelings about that. And that's what I was trying to pull at in this tiny rework scene that has some bad echoes and things in it, but where you can at least see she has a sense of what's going on. And I want to know a little bit about why she wants to go there. And because I don't know the story, it's hard for me to say whether or not she's hoping to woo Troy back or whether or not she's pissed at him and, going to poison those pears and grapes that she brings over. Maybe she's the one who's actually made him sick. I don't know. But that will allow you to sort of switch back and forth between those two. So what do you do when you want to show something in one point of view that character doesn't know? You can't. They either have to be told that thing, so someone is going to tell them that thing, or they're going to have to making, in this case, I'm going to make some assumptions that Glinda has a pretty good idea. If she knows that Karen is trying to talk her dad into letting her come over, she'll have a sense about how he's going to feel about that. So you can just sort of let that be what's shown on the page. If you want to have a scene where Glinda thinks that Troy's going to be thrilled that she's coming over because she's delusional and she has no clue that he's not in love with her anymore, then what I would do is have the first scene where Troy's getting the call and you see him being like, oh, hell to the no. I don't want her coming over here. And then we have a new scene where Glinda's all like, Troy's going to be so happy when I show up. All those kinds of things. Or conversely, your kind of other option, again, is we open with Glinda thinking, this is great that I'm coming over. He's going to be so excited. But we see his actions, so he won't meet her eyes, or he looks down, or he breaks away from the hug from her. And we get the sense that she doesn't necessarily have a good read on what's happening. And that's a great thing to do with dialogue, where you have one character who's the point of view character interpreting things. But for the reader, they're sort of having this sense, no, you can't. So sometimes I will get the question, can you go between third and first? And you can. I've seen this work well. It sometimes will work well if you're having, say, scenes from a killer's point of view. I was desperate with bloodlust. I couldn't wait to take the thing. I followed the girl down the corner. She was calling to me, although she did not know it. And then we go to third person point of view. Detective Alyssa marched down the street. Yet another body had been found. She hated her job, right? So we're then in third, and we're kind of occasionally getting first person point of view where I want to hide who the eye of the killer is. So that's an example where I've seen it working particularly very well, where you'll have the, killer is the eye, because you don't necessarily want the reader to know who that person is, but the rest of the book is in third. So that was a tremendous crash course on point of view. I'm curious if you guys have any questions about that. if you are struggling, I think one of the best things you can do, and one of the things that is one of the earliest decisions that you have to make as a writer, is what point of view you're telling the story from. And so I think it can be quite helpful sometimes to play with different options. There's a book I'm thinking of writing, and I have rewritten the first chapter now multiple times. And part of it is I'm trying to figure out if this is the book I want to write or not. But I'm going back and forth between being in first and being in third, and trying to decide what I think is going to work better. I'm leaning third because I think I want to do rotating chapters where we're in different people's points of view. So something like Pretty Little Big Lies by Leanne Moriarty, or if you've read The Party by Robin Harding, where you're getting the story from all these different points of views. I'm intrigued to sort of do that. You don't have to have multiple ones. We'll go Leslie and then Elisa.
So and I've read different takes on this. So if you have a rotating point of view, for example, I've never done that before, but I have a story with 3 points of view. And my chapters are the person's name to ground us in that. But then I read recently that somebody said that was a cheat to do that you should be able to tell that you know who that person is without knowing the name up front. But I mean, yeah, you can, but me as a reader, I always think, yeah, okay, now I know how to switch myself. So I wonder what your take on it is.
My take on it is, I think to some degree, the advice is correct. Like, you should be able to tell as I'm reading, like, oh, I'm now in Eileen's point of view. Oh, we switched. That's totally Cynthia's point of view. But I don't know why we're trying to like make things challenging for the readers. I would lean towards either putting their name, or if like past or present. So sometimes like you might have 2 points of view where Cynthia is in the 1800s and Bonnie is in present day. And so, I might start chapters Bonnie, Cynthia, or I might start them 2020 and then 1820. So I might have, but it's the same thing. It's telegraphing. And I can't tell you how many times I've had to flip back at the start of the chapter and be like, wait, am I in Bonnie's point of view? I think so. And I mean, I am a careful reader, but, Cynthia and I were talking before office hours started. Sometimes, I'm reading at the end of the day, or I'm tired, or I have a lot in my head. And if you're going to make me work for it, where I have that moment where I don't necessarily know whose point of view I'm in at any given time, sometimes that's what's going to lead to me putting the book down, because I just can't keep it straight.
That's what happened in Spinning Silver for me. Yes, yeah. I could work it out, but I had to keep going back, like, okay, who is this? Because there were so many of them. So that's actually what made me go, okay, I'm going to put names up there. And then I'm like,
I put Spinning Silver down, with all due respect. Like, it certainly had great parts of the book, but I put it down because I just have so much going on at the current time. Like, I'm like, I can't keep this straight, and I cannot expend the mental energy to keep it straight. There are books that do it and do it very well. I think parts of Wolf Hall don't tell you whose point of view that you're in. And obviously that won the Booker and the Pulitzer and everything. So it can be done. But I think in general, if you're writing commercial fiction, letting your reader know where they are and keeping them grounded just makes that easier. Elisa, you had a question.
Yeah, so if you're writing your book in third person point of view, and it's mostly deep point of view, so like, your narrator is noticing what your character is noticing, is describing the world in her eyes. But every once in a while, there's a direct thought from that character. Should that direct thought be in first person point of view italicized, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's usually how I would do it. I would put it in italics and just sort of like, I can't believe she said that, like just that kind of thing. I have seen it done both ways. So I don't know if it's a house preference. So you will get, if you go through traditional publishing, they'll often give you what they call a house guide, which is like, this is how we like to do things. So for example, Simon & Schuster does not like the word towards. I walked towards the door. They will always change it toward. I walked toward the door. So it's just one of the things. So sometimes there's a house rules about how numbers are written out, or whether or not you say percentage or put the percentage. So houses will have certain rules. So my hunch is that would be something that they might be like, we always italicize internal thoughts. And someone else might be like, that's an author choice situation. I just think you want to always make sure that it's clear. That's all, the only thing. And again, you know, this kind of dovetails nicely with what Leslie's question was, which is, it's not that I'm against making the reader work, because I'm not. I think, you know, you want them engaged in the story, but choosing where you're going to make things difficult for me is interesting. So for me, again, as someone who sometimes is writing mysteries and thrillers, you know, I want sometimes for the reader to be like, well, wait a minute, they're saying this, but last chapter they did this other thing. And that doesn't seem like that's, like, I want them to be like, now I'm not sure I trust that person, or I'm not sure that that's going on. Where I don't want them to have to work is like, wait a minute, who's talking? Those are places I don't want them to have to try and figure out what's going on. Or wait a minute, did we just change? Like, is this the next day? And that's why, you know, I'm always like, put a hard space if you're changing time, or maybe even put in the very obvious, you know, the next morning as she walked to school. Just something so the reader isn't like, well, wait, I thought we were already in school and now this thing says we're walking to school. Like, is it the next day? Those are places I don't want the reader to have to be working. So that for me is what I would lean towards. So I think if you're writing third person point of view, we're certainly now, contemporary novels are definitely most typically a fairly deep point of view in that. So if you're struggling with that, take a moment and take a chapter and rewrite it from the first person point of view. And that will often help you ground that thing. So what is this person noticing? How do they think or feel? Those kinds of things will sometimes help them with that kind of deeper moments kind of thing. So it will get them in there. So that should hopefully make that difference. So that will do it. And again, if you are trying to switch and now you want to go to first person point of view, you're just going to have to troubleshoot those situations where there's something that character doesn't know, or there's no way that they could know that. And you're going to have to figure out how else to get that in there. So overheard conversations, the most common is that someone actually tells it to them. You might not know this, Bonnie, but Leslie is plotting against you, even as we speak, right? And then Bonnie like, wait, what? And so then she is aware of that thing. But then it becomes certainly the question of, can Bonnie trust me as the person who told her that? Don't trust me, because Leslie's generally a pretty decent person. So the question, if you have a third close-up, can you ever throw a comment in from a more distant point of view? In a flash piece, I might. I would probably lean away from it in a book. I think in short stories or flash pieces, like, you just have so much more flexibility to kind of get away with things that might jar a reader. Because, and I think, to be honest, it's like, if I go to my Spinning Silver example, for me, I got the book late. I had it as a rush read from the library, so I only had 7 days to plow through it. And it's not an insubstantial book. Like, it's not a short little book. And for me, it was that thing where it's like, I just felt like I don't have the time or the energy to get there. If it had been a short story, I would have kept going, because the writing was good. I did love the descriptions. I loved the characters. I would have pushed through that because I would have been like, that's worth my investment. For me, it was the investment on the much bigger piece that I struggled with. So that would be kind of where, for me, that would make a difference. Yeah, actually, I also, I didn't do it before the book club because I think we've already established behind. But after the book club, I did go back and look at the short story, and I liked it quite a bit better. For me, it worked as that kind of thing. So there are some things that for me just don't translate. Having said that, Spinning Silver was a very successful book. So certainly lots of other people liked it. We talked a little bit yesterday in office hours. There is a huge amount of subjectivity. I've heard some people say they hate first person point of view, like they just can't stand being in it, and other people who absolutely love it. I think probably my leaning that I'm not a big fan of omniscient probably comes through. I do think it's hard to do well, but I don't necessarily like it as well. I much rather want to feel a part of a story. But I will admit, like, that is my perspective and point of view. And there are other people who love that. So going again back to yesterday's kind of thing, is the most important thing you can hang on to is what is the story that you want to tell, and then what is the best way to tell that story. So for my books that I have done most recently, they have been psychological thrillers, and a key part of it has been stuff that the main character doesn't know. So for me, if I had written those books in third, I might have had to change certain things around what other information the reader then might have become aware of. So I was able to sort of hold back certain tension by keeping us firmly grounded in first person point of view and limiting that, as well as leaving the reader with the feeling that they can't necessarily trust my characters. I think in general, I write a lot of unreliable narrators. I like them. I like that feeling of you don't always know if they're being honest, and not necessarily on purpose, but bias, right? I think we all see the world our own perspective. And so can I trust that you're seeing the world accurately, I guess, is what I find interesting. Not that you're necessarily deliberately trying to deceive me, but if you see the world differently, then that's interesting. I can't think of it, and I tried to find it on my shelf. But I did have a book that was written first person point of view, and about somewhere between the half and 3/4 point of view, I started to have the sensation that the main character had mental health challenges. And then in fact, a lot of what they were seeing was not at all accurate. And it was for me, a really great moment in the book, because it was like, this is how they see the world. They do see, these challenges and these things that don't necessarily, was it A Beautiful Mind? It might've been. That film does it really well, for sure, right? Where you're watching that movie and then all of a sudden it's like, I'm not so sure that Russell Crowe has it going on here, right? Like that what he's seeing is in any way accurate. So that's why I like that. And that story wouldn't work if you were doing it then from a third point of view. I also struggle, Bonnie talks about like preferring past tense over present tense. I find present tense to me also works really well for a short story. But I find over the course of a novel, I feel like it's that thing like when you're running on an escalator and you're always like, like you're just about to go over, like it feels, I don't know, it feels too intense. Like it's like slow your roll. Like I can't stay at that kind of intensity for an entire book. Having said that, there are people who do it incredibly well. So I struggled with that a lot when I first started writing, because I was like, well, if it's past tense and it's already over and there's no tension in the story. But that's actually not true. It does work. Any other questions or thoughts? Yeah. Go ahead, Lisa. Alyssa, I always butcher your name.
You said this, and I've read this before, where, okay, first person, you're stuck in someone's head. Third person, you have a bit more ability to see things that they don't see. But my understanding was that we're sort of supposed to be doing a close third person, deep POV, so we're not really noticing anything that character isn't noticing.
Where you can get away with the third, where you're still very close, is the idea that you might have a rotating chapter that's from someone else's point of view that your character is in no way aware of. So you will often see this with like mystery novels, where the bulk of the story is all filtered through the detective and what the detective knows, but you as the reader may have information the detective doesn't have. And again, that is a way to build tension, because you see the character doing something that you know is going to be a bad decision, because you have information that they don't have. So that will work there.
But aren't we, I think in your Hanging Girl, that was told from multiple first person points of view, wasn't it?
No, it's all from the main character's point of view. And how sad is it where I had a moment where I had to think about that? Oh, actually, that's a lie. Thank you for knowing my book better than I do. There are a couple chapters that are coming from Paige's point of view, where she is also in first person.
Yes, yeah, that's what I meant, sorry.
Yeah.
So the rule about third person versus first person is kind of disintegrating. Like now you can get it, now you can do more kind of, I guess, skipping in different chapters in first person more, or?
I think you always could. That was always an option. It just depends on the experience that you want the reader to have. And if you've read The Hanging Girl, which clearly you've read it closer than I have most recently, is I wanted almost in a Gone Girl sense where the initial scenes that are coming from Paige's point of view are actually to mislead the reader because she's lying in those pages, right? So what we're getting from her is not in fact accurate. And what you find is that her point, like, it really isn't her story. I'm totally using her to manipulate the reader to give them, sorry reader, to totally give them a different perspective and to make them think and to further sell the idea that the main character is involved in this abduction in a way that was more difficult to do without that. But her point of view does drop. It is not completely shared all the way through. You will see books that rotate just in the same way that we have often books that are multiple third-person points of view. You will see some books that are rotating first-person point of view. And I think it can work, and it can work quite well. And again, for the reader, then they do know kind of what's happening. They are an this. I think Cynthia's thing should be our new t-shirt. So Cynthia wrote, point of view is like the pirate code. They're more like guidelines. As soon as you think you've got point of view worked out, someone else does it in a different way that you didn't think would work or could work. So I guess what I would say is, in general, part of what you're playing with is where are you as a writer? And if you're particularly in kind of the earlier things, then sticking with a clear point of view is probably going to just help you without trying to get tricky. And there'll be times to do that. It's also really useful as you're reading, just go through and look at what point of view and how would the story be different? Like, how would Harry Potter be different if we were rotating and getting all of Hermione's kinds of thoughts and definitely, you know, much deeper into what's going on with her or those kinds of things. Like, she does give us different points of view, but in general, we're fairly firmly rooted in Harry. And then just kind of things. And yeah, I do think you will sometimes see a scene that sort of starts at a very distance and then pulls its way in, almost like a camera focusing in. So you will see that done. So point of view is fun to play with. It is the thing that will sometimes drive you crazy, where people will say, I think you just changed point of view, and you suddenly realize that you did. So if there are any ground rules is play with how you want to tell the story, because that will determine what point of view you want to use. Don't be afraid to try different point of views as you're figuring out what's going to work with the story. In general, you're probably going to want to stick with either first or third and give omniscient and second a pass, although don't feel like you absolutely can't do those things. In general, again, third person close is much more popular now. So if you're trying to do kind of genre fiction, digging a little bit deeper, and that's probably going to serve you some better things. And if you're changing point of view, make sure that's clear to the reader. Don't make them work for it. Unless working for it is somehow part of your machinations and what you're going for and all those kinds of things. And that is a crash course on point of view that probably in no way still covers everything that you need to know, but should give you at least some of the ideas to start thinking about. And for Lily, who's going to listen to this later, I will email you back your pages where I then basically hijacked your story and started telling it myself. Sorry about that again. But that was the easiest way for me to try and explain how I think you could do what you were wanting to tackle. So forgiveness there. And if it's at all useful, then feel free to steal anything that I wrote, with the exception of that word echo of cool, which was really horrible in a 3-paragraph thing. I didn't catch that. That's all I have to say about that. All right. I will go on. If other people have questions or want people to look over pages, we will be doing office hours. So right now, what we tackle on Tuesday right now is still flexible. Wednesday, Donna's going to be doing self-affirmations because she's going to be covering my office hours while I have an appointment I can't get out of. So there we have it. And until then, I will see all you guys around the Academy.